Hey, my name is Joe. Welcome to Shepherd's Workbench. So we're going to begin by breaking down our plywood sheets. I like to use this insulation here. This rigid film insulation was like $20 for a 4x8 sheet over top of my assembly table. You'll see here this is a 1/2 inch plywood, maple plywood. And I'm going to first start off by laying out all my lines. You see me kind of measuring here. Since this is a corner cabinet mantle build, I wanted to make sure that I had my angles right. The TV we have doesn't sit perfect to where each side is the same length in the corner. So I wanted to make sure I had enough and I was making the best use of my plywood. I probably should have done it in SketchUp, but you can see me pulling my book out there. I had all my measurements written on paper and did not make them a digital copy. You see me just kind of drawing out all of my lines just to make sure that I get the right measurements, which I'm going to cut all of my pieces with my Craig track saw jig. You see me there pulling off the French wall. This is the best way to break down these big sheets into smaller portions. As try as I might, I tried to cut the bigger pieces once I got them smaller on the table saw. I think I actually include one of my attempts on here, but the track saw just made really quick work of it. It's super accurate. It's really easy to set up. As you saw, it's just a couple Phillips screws to attach to my circular saw, and then I can cut it down to rough measurements, and then later try it again. But like I said before, the table saw, it was so awkward and the angles were just so weird. I could not get it to cut on my table saw. So I went and did my rough cuts here, and then went again and got it down to its final measurements with the track saw. You can also see here that my dust collection is great in the shop. I'm going to stick the two boards together with duct tape, blue painter's tape and CA glue. But because I didn't want to miss where I had the blue tape and didn't want to accidentally glue these together, you could see me putting the blue painter's tape down, CA glue, and then flipping the blue painter's tape for the sticky side up on top of that. So then that way I just didn't miss the blue painter's tape if I tried to do it on both sides and do that. So this is my little slide out. I pull out my miter saw sled for my table saw. That's where I keep all of my table saw jigs. And here is my attempt. I ended up doing a plunge cut on the table saw, holding the miter saw to get it all the way through. And I realized I didn't get it all the way through. And here was probably a pretty dangerous thing. But I am comfortable enough with this table saw where I felt comfortable and confident doing it. So I just pulled the piece back towards me, which does give a higher risk for kickback. So if you're going to try that, make sure you are confident. And if you feel unwary about it, don't do it. It just can only lead to dangerous things. Yeah, I definitely forgot my safety goggles. You'll see me, I put my hearing protection on in a little bit too. So with the dust collection being absolutely terrible in my shop, I was getting sawdust like crazy in my eyes. So it forced me to realize I need to have my glasses on. So we're going to rip the sides down. I made the sides out of 3/4 inch plywood just so it's a little bit beefier to hold it to the wall. We rip it to 5 inches. Because overall what I planned to do was inside the mantle where the hidden storage is. I want to be able to put my Xbox with a controller on top of the Xbox and have some room on top. And I measured it with a controller and the Xbox in there, and it was about 5 inches. So you can see me here. I'm kind of just picking which side is going to be the top and the bottom, and then I'm laying out where my sides are going to go, so I can mark out the angles and the length, just so then that way it's precise to the project, because I did end up leaving the 3/4 inch plywood inset a little bit onto the mantle. And I did that just so there wasn't any issues as far as the door closing with the hinge that I was going to eventually mortise out. And I think one side, because I had one side that was 40 inches and one side that was 36 inches, one cut was 40 inches and the other side was 50 inches. I ended up realizing that I couldn't go to 40 inches on my table saw, so I couldn't do those miters. So I ended up just doing both of them at the 40 inch cut. So I'm going to pull out my crosscut sled here just to get it down to final size before I cut the miter joints. So you can see me here adjusting the table saw blade to reach that 50 degree mark. I know I said earlier, but I ended up cutting both of them at 50 degrees, not the 40 degrees. I probably should have turned the table saw off when I'm touching the saw blade, but I forgot. So now we're going to do some pocket holes. All of the pocket holes that I drilled are actually going to be on the inside of it. I probably should have switched them around. If I was to do this over again, I would have made it so that they were on the outside, so then they were never seen again. But I did not have that foresight when I did this. Now, my pocket hole jig, I do have a Craig. I have the little one that comes with the adjustable bit and stuff, but I liked this one. This one's from Harbor Freight. I think I picked it up for probably about $50. And I like it. It does really good for pocket holes. I just use all of Craig's screws because the screws that come with the Harbor Freight one are junk. So I got the pocket holes drilled, and they're gonna be secured first, and then I will do through holes on the bottom piece because the bottom screws are just never going to be seen. So I did add glue here. So I glued it and clamped it because sometimes the pocket holes tend to move when you're drilling them in. So make sure that if you put glue down that you're clamping it first and then drill your pocket holes. And I clamped all of these and added some extra clamps just to give it some more pressure because the pocket holes were drilled pretty far apart. But I realized if I was going to clamp the whole thing, I might as well have put the bottom on. So I did. Here I am cleaning up all the glue squeeze out with a rag. And then I drilled all of my holes. This is the bottom here. So again, all of these screws are not going to be seen, so I'm not worried about hiding them. I did not put screws in the back 2 inches of that corner because eventually I'm going to cut it out to get cords to go in behind it. So then that way I can hide all of that with some trim pieces. As you can see right here, I'm also countersinking all of those screws, and that way they're flush with the bottom. And then I just drove in all of the screws. Yes, I'm using drywall screws here. No, I don't really care. It's really not going to make a huge difference, and I had a crap ton of these from redoing somebody's basement, so I figured I would use what I had. All right, guys, so it's the next day. Glue's all dried. I'm about to take the clamps off, but here's the problem. Or I should say what I'm struggling with. Because I originally made this out of 1/2 inch plywood, and I knew the risks of it being thinner and being a mantle and stuff like that, which is why the sides are made out of 3/4 inch plywood and the tops are made out of 1/2 inch. But here's what I'm worried about. there's quite a bit of flex in there. And I don't want to put a piece in here to stabilize it over time because, well, that would just look ugly. I need to make a door. So I'm wondering if maybe I inset a piece so it keeps it straight. I don't know. I think what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to leave it like this and hope my wife doesn't put super heavy decorations on top and ruin it. But if I figure if it starts sagging over time, we'll cross that bridge when we get there, I guess. So after letting it sit for about 12 hours, I took off all of the clamps and made sure that it was set. Then I started measuring for the front face. Now the front face is going to have a little bit of an angle. You see me cutting here because it is mounted in the corner. The door has to match that corner. And as most of you will know, there are no such thing as square walls in a house. So I did these at the 50-degree mark. I figure it's going to leave a little bit of a gap, but I wasn't super concerned about that. See what I did? And you can see this first one I cut. I did not account for my miter, so when I cut it, it was too short. So I had to go cut out another one. That's better. And here is the new piece. So here's what I did. Rather than mitering the whole corners, I kind of just nipped off a little bit from either end. So in that way, when that's up against the wall, that'll hide that seam. All right, so now I got this piano hinge from an old toy box I built. We're gonna mount this on the bottom side. So this is the bottom. We're gonna mount it centered in here. And what I'm gonna do, rather than chiseling out the front face so that taking equal parts out of either, I'm just gonna chisel the whole thing out of this one, or out of the bottom piece. So in that way I can leave that front face by itself. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure it, mark it, and then I'll take my router and route out the groove and then clean it up with a chisel before we mount in the hinge. So yeah. So the router was good in theory, but I realized if I started cutting out 1/4 of an inch on one side as I pushed the router, I lost my other reference surface. So it came out horrible. And right towards the end, the bit, I think, burned out. It was just a cheap bit, and I didn't feel like going to the store and buying another one. So what I ended up doing was just cleaning it up with the jigsaw and the circular saw. Here I am just kind of marking out where it should have gone. Had the router actually worked like I thought it would. So I cut a straight line and cleaned it up with a jigsaw. So the hinge fits flush into that notch I just cut out. So then that way the front face will fit flush against the face of it. So I am pre-drilling all of these. These screws are brass. They are not brass coated, so they do tend to strip out. I do screw them in with a miter gate or an impact gun. I probably should have done this by hand. I had 2 of them that really stripped out bad with it. They did include with this piano hinge a steel screw that you can cut all of your holes in, but I didn't use it. This is me just kind of using iron-on edge banding. Because that 3/4 inch miter cut was longer than the 3/4 of an inch, I had to use 2 pieces, but the seam was virtually invisible once I got it in and sanded well and mashed it all together. The Danish oil really didn't highlight the 2 pieces of edge banding I used inside there. So the whole front is going to get edge banded, as well as all 4 sides of the door. I didn't do any edge banding behind it because once it's mounted to the wall, you're never going to see it. So I'm using a fast cap patterning marker to mark out all of the holes on the other side, and I found out the screws are too long. So I started off on my grinding wheel to grind those screws down. They were relatively soft because they are brass, and I made sure to go around the side. But I ended up going to my grinder because it was just so much faster. So I put all of the screws in the vise and then did a one pass with the grinder. Not a bad time to contemplate your life choices after you've ground down some 24 screws. So on to what seemed like years of sanding. I started off at 120 grit and then worked my way up to 220. I felt like I probably could have stopped at 120 and been fine. But I ended up going up just because it's probably going to get touched a lot with the door opening and closing. I have a 7-year-old that lives in our house, so he was probably going to be the one opening the door more often than not. So I wanted to make sure it was just extra soft. So I had to make sure that I had to sand off all of my pencil marks and markings where I marked which one was the top, which was the bottom, all of my angles, and all of my length measurements to get all of that stuff sanded so it didn't be highlighted by the Danish oil. And so I did use a Watco, I think that's how you say it, Danish oil in a dark walnut color. So what I like to do is I just pour a little bit on and spread it out with a foam brush. Then I come back with a towel and wipe it clean. This just gives a good finish. I've always had good experience doing it this way. It just makes the Danish oil last a lot longer. I realize I've done it before where you pour it into the rag and then wipe it on, but I feel like the rag soaks up most of it, whereas this foam brush, because it's like a sponge, it soaks it up, but you could squeeze it back out. So I like to spread it out and then wipe it all off once it sits on there for a couple seconds, and you never realize the difference in color. And I did do the inside of it. I had contemplated not doing the inside because I thought, this is my house. What do I care? But I knew it would come back to haunt me later, and I would have just wished I did it before. So I went through and did it while I had it in the shop. So this is the little hole I made. That way the cords can come down the wall, go in here. All I did was cut it off. It looks real bad there, but I cut the top and the bottom piece with the circular saw, and then I finished it up with my pole saw. For the finish, I am using Minwax Antique Finish. It is a wipe-on poly, essentially, and it dries really hard and adds kind of a sheen, a glossy finish to it, and is really, really well protected. It works really great. I love that finish. I am using a red shop towel because I was out of the terry cloths I normally use. It did leave some red fibers on there, which really sucked to clean off, but I had to make sure I cleaned it off before the finish dried. So I ended up coming back with just a white towel that you get in the big boxes to get a lot of that red fiber out of it. All right, next time you see this, I'm going to install it. And here it is. Totally installed. I never did the trim pieces just yet to hide all of those cords and wires. But you can see how that back hole allows for all of those cords to be hidden. Overall, it was a really great project. I loved it, and it was a lot of fun. It took me about 2 days, but it turned out great. Thanks for watching. Bye.